really, it's all connected. It really is. You know, the work that we did last night, it's all wanting to create change in the way we are living our lives. You know, maybe back then I was doing more separating out and doing it, and now I just see how it's all fully integrated in the lifetime, the daily life. You know, whether it's who I talk to or, you know, who asked me to do a piece of artwork. But the artwork I do in theater is always political. It's always with an organizing element around it, or like Jennifer's circus, it just is what it is, you know, and it moves through, you know, boroughs and so many different people. It's unbelievable. And, you know, learning how to negotiate that, living at a peace camp and interfacing with people who are not from there, you know, we did a lot of that skills there with each other, but then it was just also on the street and how do you be, and, you know, I think for me it gave me a lot of confidence, just like doing a small, just me or another woman demonstrating and then going to court and having to speak in court, you know. I feel like I had the strength of all of that time, of all of us doing it. You know what I mean? It wasn't, and I feel it now too. I feel very hopeful even in these kind of weird, crazy ass times. It's, yeah.
Can you tell us about your experience at Greenham? How it was different from the Peace Camp here?
Mm-hmm.
But as you do that, would you transition us from, so you spoke about feeling like, okay, we're going to stay on the land and I need to stay for a little while to sort of help that, and then did you give yourself a time frame? Did you meet somebody? Why did you?
Oh, so I was telling you about Margaret.
Right, okay, there we go.
Oh, good, Margaret. So there I was. Again, this woman, Mary, was like a little connector, because she had met Margaret first. And I was leaving. I had to leave to do something. And so, I don't know if it was whatever, but Mary said to me, oh, well, I want you to meet Margaret, and she needs a bowl. And I think I gave her my wooden bowl, you know, and that was the meeting on the boardwalk. I met Margaret on the boardwalk, and I gave her my bowl, and I'm leaving, and I'm going to come back, and so then I'll get my bowl back, that kind of thing. And there was something that happened, and she could not live out, camping out. She was like a little bit nervous about being outside living, so she was one of the women that lived clustered in one of those rooms upstairs. She had a little corner and everything. And here she was. She had come specifically she had left like her whole life, and she came to be in the United States to do this peace camp thing, and then to travel across the states by herself. And, you know, it was like a journey that she did. And when she went back, they actually began organizing, and she was part of organizing what they called the resistance camp, the women's resistance camp. And they specifically picked the word resistance because that was connected to their history of resistance in Germany. And so they wanted to respect that, honor that, bring that with them. So that's why they called it the resistance camp rather than a peace camp. And they actually, anyway, so Margaret I met, I came back, we became fast and dirty friends. She was living there. That's why there's a picture of her and me at the house painting, covered with paint, because we were painting the outside of the house. A great portrait of the two of us. So she lived there. That's why she knew. Do you kind of?
Remember
Yeah.
Margaret.
And did Rosemary from Canada? She was also living there at the time.
Rosalie.
Rosalie, right? Rosalie. So those were two others that were living and going through this whole process. And Margaret will have a memory because she has a memory. She'll be able to tell us those stories.
Rosalie's last name.
That's what we want. She'll have it. Okay. I already wrote a note. Margaret, we gotta find her.
Margaret? Is she?
She's in Germany, but she does come here now and then.
So it's the same woman that Allison Kim
Yes.
spoke about?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Do you know Allison Kim?
Well, only through Margaret. Is she West Coast?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think Margaret went and stayed. And actually, Margaret's coming out story, because she was like one of the first women that I know that came out as herself. She came out as a lesbian on some street in San Francisco. She did like this ritual. I'm a lesbian. I'm out as a lesbian. It was like, it wasn't about she had a relationship with any woman. It wasn't about that she fell in love with anybody. It's like, this is Margaret. This is why we love Margaret. She's so the meeting and the sort of what I call the love affair with Margaret, which has now lasted all the way here, is like we didn't know it at the time, but eventually we called ourselves companion lovers. It was like a lifetime, you know, we knew we would be together, even though we ended up across other sides of the ocean, and we weren't like ever lovers. We were this companion lovers. And they did an amazing thing. A couple of things happened. She went back, and women were gathering, and they were talking about, you know, they wanted a peace camp, and they were doing this, organizing a peace, but their peace camp was not, it was on a visa, a piece of land that they got to rent. It was not far, it was in a village called Reckeshausen, and it was, women would come for a month, because not far away there was a couple of sites. One was where I think they were bringing maybe the Pershings, and then there was some other military communications thing, and there was a lot of shit going on in that area, and it was countryside in the Hunsrück. And these women like met, and they were organizing, and they do a lot more discussions than we do. Incredible. And there's no, that's what they do. They talk and they talk and they talk and they talk and they talk. So it was really quite an experience to sort of get hooked up with them. So there was this thing, my connection with Margaret strengthened. I went to Greenham. I went to see her. I stayed at the peace camp there, the resistance camp there. I got to know women there. Teresa came to Greenham. Maybe we went together. I'm not sure if she came to Greenham to see me, but there was a bond that started, and the relationship with other women, like the spinsters, Margaret got to know. She stayed in Teresa's house in New Haven. You know, this sort of developed. And from that, there was a group of women also in Germany that were, even though they were doing the resistance camp every month, they were saying, we have to live here all year round. You know, this is the same thing we had done, right? And she had already sort of lived through that, and these women were saying, we have to do that. So there's a connection in all of that. But it's so nice to know that this thread for me is Margaret to Germany, to then this whole thing that opens up there. I mean, they're doing it on their own too, but there was this like thread that then became even stronger over time, which went back and forth, and I'll tell you about that. But let's see, Margaret there. These women gathered, they had these discussions. Two of the women went over eventually. Laura Radash, who was one of the spinsters in New Haven, she actually fell in love with a woman and ended up moving over there and being part of what they did. Is they decided to form a collective, and the collective was going to be live in that farming region of the Hunsrück and live their resistance daily in their lives. So it wasn't just about the nuclear stuff, it was all the other stuff. They were going to just bring it right in. So these women came from all over Germany, having their meetings. They'd gather for weekends, have their meeting, and some said, okay, now we're ready to do it. So Margaret was like one of the last ones to actually move there. Some of the first ones to move there, they went and they trained to be biological farmers, so that when they did start to rent a place, the first thing they said, we have to live like the people live here. We have to find a way to be self-sufficient and subsistent. So they did their subsistence farming. They had the animals. You know, the first one was called Lila or something, you know, I don't know, something like that. You know, the first cow and the first baby of the cow, and then they had sheep, and then they had, and we spread, that collective spread into 3 households. One, eventually, we just sold the house. Talk about how things break up. That was more than 10 years. That was a collective that grew from this small group of women that started fairly small. Getting one house grew to 3 different houses in 3 different villages. So the collective extended this, and that's what I got to have an experience with, because I would go there and they were my collective. I never got to have a collective here, but I did have one there.
And
I had the spinsters here. I lived there. Well, I lived there back and forth.
Yeah.
I lived there, I think the longest I lived there was maybe 9 months or a year at one time.
Okay.
But yeah, they did. So, and that resistance was in the villages every day. Every year at Kristallnacht, they would set up in the center of the town, and they'd have all this information, and they had done all this research, and they would really bring to light the past and how we have to remember the past in order not to repeat the story. So they did research with the Jews. What did they do? Where did they live? The people didn't know about that, or they certainly didn't talk about it. And then we started to strike up this thing, because being such organized, there was this group of women who were doing this collective and stuff, and their sort of thread of women that they were doing the work with, the political work, and then we spinsters, and we said, why don't we do an exchange? So they got money from the Boy Scouts, and maybe that doesn't go in here. I don't know. Anyway, they did a good amount of fundraising, and they were able to invite us as a group. And so we gathered, I don't know how many of us, this sort of extension of spinsters, and we went there. And it was a month long. We spent a week, I think, at the camp. Some joined us afterwards. We spent a week at a women's retreat where we had all these women came, and we had discussions about identity, national identity, political work, history of our countries. What are the similarities and differences between Germany and the United States? You know, what is our organizing tools? How do we do this? You know, what are our class? I mean, women found out that they were Jewish when they didn't know that. They were, you know, there was unbelievable work, personal work and political work that came out of that. And then we did a week in Berlin. And I think two of the most things that stood out for me was we had a tour, one-day tour on one of these fancy tour buses that these two women organized around the political resistance history, past and present, in Berlin. And we just did a tour bus around, and they, you know, talked on this thing. You know, you get out, but you get out of a site where so-and-so was murdered, or you get out of a site where the women's prison was, where women political prisoners were at that time. In this country, we didn't talk about political prisoners, even though we had them. So that, you know, sort of strengthened our work here to like really start dealing with the issues of, because there they discussed it, here we didn't. You know, and that sort of, the spinsters even moved into doing work with political prisoners here. And when the Puerto Ricans were being arrested here for this Wells Fargo robbery that took place in Hartford, and they were the first ones to be held without being charged. They were the longest held, right, without being charged. And that was the first time they did that. Now they do it without a question. But they were held for over a year. But that connection between the two countries, right, and the women organizing was really astounding when I look back on it. At the time, it was just, this is what we're doing. And then they came here. We did a whole thing in New York. And we were guests. We were guests. We stayed at Jennifer's loft because we knew, you know, Jennifer. She was a friend of ours at that point. And so a bunch of women stayed there. Andrea Doremus organized a lot of the New York, what they did when they came to New York. We had a girls' camp that we rented in Connecticut somewhere, and that's where we did our week-long discussions where we brought women. You know, it wasn't just the spinsters and the German collective. They gathered women that came, and we gathered women further beyond just our little network, and had these long, great, interesting discussions about sort of our work and our life, and really moved us a lot further. And then I think our like sort of retreat thing is we went to NUMER as a group, New England Women's Music Festival, and we went there, and we were all like working as the work crew and continued and did our stuff, and that was pretty cool. And then we went back again another time, and I think they came back here, and then it started to be, I think the time I went, some people dropped out. There was this whole question about, you know, how are we dealing with our own internal racism? How are we dealing with organizing with women of color? Because most of us were white women, and that whole thing. That's when I think Daisy came with us, I think, on that trip. And there were a couple of women of color from Vermont that came with us.
Ra, one of them?
Ra was one of them.
Pam?
And Pam.
Had studied German.
That's right. That's right. And I was one of the spinsters that went, although we didn't go as a group like we had before. And it was hard. There were women there like Margaret wasn't. There were certain women that pulled out and said, we're not going to participate on the level that we did, but we will as white women, you know, sit in council almost like and deal with some issues that we want to deal with in relation to it. We had a lot of like translating. The translating stuff was big. Women were good at that because we had language barriers. So we had to do translating. A lot of our discussions had to be translated. Yeah. No, it was really, really good. Really good. We were at this collective place in I even forget what it was called. It was a squat maybe, and that's where we stayed in Berlin, and big area, kind of community squat is what I remember. I remember making our T-shirts there. We were doing it in German about the International Women's Conspiracy and the resistance movement. And
so where between Seneca and German, that thing did Greenham land?
oh, so I left Seneca, and I went to, so I think I took a little break where I like prepared myself to go, because I was also in transition of leaving Connecticut and being a little bit more in New Haven, and which was a sort of with Teresa, but also she had a partner, so it was kind of a little complicated household. And but it was my preparing to go. And then it was Laura Flanders' mother received me. It was like, where do I go? You know, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going by myself. I'm going to this place I don't know, but I know it's where I want to be and meant to be. And from whatever that was that year before, I'm getting there, and it was Laura's birthday. And so I was kind of Laura Flanders' birthday, so I was sort of like the birthday present to Mom. It was me. That's the way her mother received me. She was so beautiful. And I got like stayed in this lovely home, and she got me on a bus. She said, this is the way the women get there. You know, I put you on this bus, and then you get off there, and oh, don't worry about it. You'll be in Newbury, and you'll know. I said, well, will there be a sign? No, but you'll see. And there was you know, I mean, the women, we thought we stuck out. They really stuck out in this little town of Newbury, Brookshire. So, you know, you saw the purple hair and the, you know, the chains and the piercings, and, you know, we looked mild compared to this crowd. And I was like, just follow one of them, you know, I don't know, I think there was like a bow, you get on this bus and it just drops you at the main gate, you know, and that was the yellow gate, and that was my introduction. It was like, there was a huge action call, and I made it in time for that, and I don't know if it was December 3rd or
December 12th and 13th.
maybe December 12th and 13th, there you go. And I just set up my same little pup tent, the yellow little single woman pup tent that I had at the very end of the, I don't even know the field, right where at Seneca, right where the wood part started.
Amazon.
I was sort of like in that Amazon acres, right. Kim stayed in her big Scheherazade, and I had my little yellow, looking like a little teepee thing there, and I brought that, and that I lived in until they changed the zoning, and they just took everything that we owned and just put it in the muncher and ate it up, and so it was like we couldn't be there. So that's when we learned how to make our benders, that they were these quick, fast and dirty. But that first winter we were a settlement in every gate, and that was a huge demonstration, that one that I entered into. So I entered into something that was like, good thing I was prepared, a little prepared ahead of time, because I had no idea the numbers that were going to be there, and who and how, and just like what countries they were coming from to do this. Yeah, there were women carrying like sacred sticks from Australia, from people that they were given this, and from, I don't know who the name of the people were now. But so, yeah, it was like, and that was, and I ended up in the Green Gate, which was a really cool gate, and it was women, you know, men weren't allowed there. They could visit across the street, and, you know, and we had some pretty fun. It was they had an incredible sense of humor, I have to say. This Greenham women, if you could say, because we really came from a lot of places, but the sense of humor was really just beyond, you know, like just the beautiful things that we did, like, you know, that really connected to our things. But you'd wake up in the morning and all of a sudden there was like a hole in the fence and there was a beautiful curtain hanging on it. You know, it was like a window. You want to, you know, you can see in our home, we can see into your home kind of thing. And you never know who did it. You didn't have to ask. And people were always bringing presents of bowl cutters, and, you know, we got, you know, coal from the coal miners. We supported their strike, and all of a sudden we got a delivery of coal, and, you know, we needed it. It was harsh to be burning coal at your fire pit to keep warm in the winter, but it was also like, wow, how heartwarming to get such a gift, you know. And we really had, like, we didn't have like the big kitchens, because we were these little settlements around the thing, but you had to have enough to really, you know, have, I don't know how many women we had there at that time, but we had a big kitchen, and food was pouring in, and you had to be organized who was cooking, and it was very anarchistic, more than, I would say, you know, our clipboards. It worked. And the money issue was totally different, because there was not, I mean, first of all, the land issue. We didn't have to own land. And there was not even a thought of owning land. You know, we don't. This is our land, and it really was. Greenham Common was a common land, and that NATO base was given. The people's land was given to NATO, and then, you know, just kept extending, and this was like, we've had it, you know. So all the surrounding land was still common land. That's why we could actually be there. And there was one little piece of private land that we were allowed to like stash our stuff on when the zoning changed. They actually changed the zoning where you couldn't have structures. So at least we, at Green Gate, we had like a sanctuary. We called it the sanctuary, and that was safe. And I moved into the holly bender, which was this beautiful holly tree that was huge. And it was, because it was holly, it was a little like, who wanted to go near it? Because it's a bit prickly, but there was a like little passageway, and you could actually live in there, and it was green all year round, so nobody would know you were there. And somehow I inherited that spot, and that was really beautiful.
Did you see other women from Seneca during that time?
Oh yeah, they came through. Like, I think Kim came there. Who else came there? Dolphin was there. Oh yeah. But now they all blend. Like, who's from where?
Right.
Who's from where?
Yeah.
Did you come?
No,
I never did.
didn't.
I thought
No.
you were. Probably
No.
imagined you there.
Did you have the way Seneca had the clipboards and the laborers, did you have any place at Greenham where you had the more blah versus the other?
There was a little bit more of that, but there was not as much out really from, it was within the living situation, not so much not living there.
Mm-hmm.
Although there were women that came and went, but that could vary, like what they were. They were teachers and they came on weekends or until they finally, retired early so that they can live. A lot of the living there, you had women coming for the big demonstrations, so this was going on all the time, or weekend demonstrations. This happened all year round, and then you had the major ones, but you had the ones that were like coming and living there. They came. There was a woman that came to do from, I can't remember her name now. She actually came from Massachusetts. She was like working on her PhD, and she was like doing her PhD, and ended up like, everything about her, the way she looked, what she, was totally different. And there was like, she stayed, and there was like, how can I go back now? I have to go back to that world. How do I re-enter? And how do I capture what into this sort of, a document that it does, you can't. How do you describe this? How do you do an academic, document about what I've just lived? So I remember that. I can't remember her name. Yeah, people came and then they stayed. Sometimes they didn't even go back out. And young, there were young ones there. There were babies born there. There was children that came there. There was, but the money thing was different because people were on the dole. So, and there was not like, you're just living off of us, or we're raising money for you to live kind of thing. It was like, so me being from another country, it was like, oh, you don't get the dole. We got to make sure the women that don't get the dole get the dole. There was no question that, I got money for being there. I got my living money because I had no other resource. Women who had resources would come there and they'd live off of their own for sure. But women that didn't, there was no judgment, and that was new to me. I didn't know that system. I didn't know that system, that it was not a negative thing to be on welfare. I grew up, you're ashamed if you're on welfare, because my family didn't have money, and, we had to ask for money. But there was shame. There was no shame that I could feel. It's certainly not in this group of women. But there was tension. And I believe one of the biggest places where there was tension, there was a gathering that happened, a meeting that was happening at the Green Gate, or between the Green Gate and the Yellow Gate. I can't remember exactly. I think it was Green Gate. I think it was right on the roadway. And one of the women took like all of the documentation of all of the money that was donated to us and how it was going, because there was starting to be this like fighting around money, and it was like, whoa, this is intense. And one woman like, stood up and just took all that information and threw it into the fire, and it just like went into up in flames. And I was like, now that is a metaphor for something here. That was quite intense. And then it was like, after that I started to realize, this is what's happening. This is the zapping that's going on. Then we started to be able to like understand some of the crazy behavior that was being exhibited, like that, the anger with each other, the tensions. Because we didn't necessarily have that. We had differences, but we found, and there was space to have difference, because you could be at the green gate and you could have no men, and you could be at the yellow gate and you could receive everybody and anybody could stay there. You could be at, this because if this was you were a vegan, or you could, it could be any lifestyle, it could be anything that you would do. So that was intense, and that was when we were beginning to find out, and we were brought in this guy to do, he offered to come in and he offered to do the testing, and it was found that there was, and that was happening, where it was directed, which it seemed to happening at all the gateways, and we started to learn and get educated about what's going on, and then it started to spread out. Like one of the Dutch women did translations in it, and she got it out there. It was trying, but we had to how are we going to do this? We couldn't risk who he was and what he was doing. This was before it got out further, and how that was really being developed as a weapon, right? And the tests that they had done with animals and what happened to the animals that they did it to, and they could change the amount that they were doing and the disruption. And we felt like, are we getting, experimented with, and why is this happening, and how do we deal with it? Some women had to leave. Some women noticed it just in how their menstrual cycle changed or that stopped, and others really started to feel really sick. And I don't know how I was personally affected by it, because I think that was more. It was more towards the end of me. I think I went with a group of women to Nicaragua from the States, so I hooked up with some women and did that trip in between and came back. But the zapping when it came back was...
How long were you at Greenham, a duration of time you came into?
I think it was 9 months, between 9 and 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
So that year from 83 around to 84. And can you just say for folks that might listen or read this or listen to it that don't know, you referenced zapping. What did you know about that? What is that? What did you know about that, or do you know about that?
What do I know about it? I know that it is, I'm not sure, but I think it's radio frequencies. It's some kind of frequencies that you can put at a certain level, and you can direct it, almost concentrate it, and how you direct it and concentrate that. It could immobilize. It can do anything from immobilize you to destroy you, organs and things internally which you can't even see. If they intensified it, I think with the deer that were going through, I don't know where I get this from Seneca, from Greenham. I think there was talk about that they found the deer, they were dead, but from the outside you couldn't tell what killed them, but you could, if you could dissect them or see what happened to the insides of them. And then later on I knew that they were using it, now as a weapon, a police weapon, and which, made me really creepy. But that was just beginning, and when I was leaving, So I still kept in contact, and, the Dutch woman came to the States, and she got involved with doing, some of those women from Greenham and the women that I met started to come here and work with spinsters or would visit us, and then started working on the political prisoner stuff and the Puerto Ricans, and we're putting that out further too, taking that information and getting that out further. But then that's when also there was the Russian trip. There were didn't women from Seneca go to, there was that whole trip that happened.
Yeah.
Wasn't that around?
Doreen told us about that.
Yeah, I didn't know very many women went though. Do you know?
I don't know that.
That's something that
And
I
I
don't
would
know
like to
much
remember more. Yeah, because I'm wondering if I'm mixing up, or if there were also some German women that went on that same trip.
About.
But definitely there were Seneca women that went on that trip. And
Well,
who were they?
Doreen, I know, went to Russia, but I am not aware of who the other women might have been.
So you were at Greenham and then Germany, and then did you ever come back to Seneca after you left and went to Greenham?
I didn't live there again. I was certainly connected and came up a few times, I think, and maybe even as spinsters we came up again. Maybe there must have been more actions after I came back. But my concentration of my activism with the was with the spinsters in New Haven, and we started doing them. Well, we went to larger demonstrations as an affinity group, like we did our boat action, but a lot of it was our own sort of kind of creative women's thing that we did. Either was around Central America, what was happening in Nicaragua, bringing that issue right in New Haven, downtown New Haven, from leafleting to taking over the recruiting center and doing, our creative, disruptive moments of, this is what we did. We were sewing bags that we thought, backpacks that the soldiers should be carrying down, and they were like recycled coffee bags, that one of us worked and gathered. I think I did, and took the coffee bags, and we made backpacks. It was a design based on the woman from Amsterdam, a design of a pack that she had, and we were sewing them on their desks, and with our little sewing machines. And then there was the bread making, bread not bombs, and we were actually said, okay, we're not just going to bring the already baked bread, but we're actually going to be kneading the dough on their desks. So we had flour and water, and we had the beans that were being distributed, throughout, as whoever got up on the soapbox, which was Teresa and Joan Kavanaugh, and they would do their speech. And there were all the different offices in one room, in one building, so we would be in different rooms doing that, whether it was the Marines or whatever. It was like, and there was a big demonstration outside, but it was really like, it was great to have that support on the outside, is what it felt like, although there was just the civil disobedience on the inside and the gathering of the people on the outside. And then the different whether which part of the military, they were like, when the police came, it's like, no, look what they did in my room, no, look what they did in my room. And there were these young men signing up going, wow, like they couldn't sign up that day, and whether they ever did, I don't know. But they finally, there was such a commotion that they finally were able to gather us. This one woman cornered me in one of the offices and said, "What are you on drugs?" She shut the door behind her, and then she was like she captured me, and I was like, "What are you on drugs?" And I was like, "Well, no, but I would ask you that same question, why are you doing what you're doing?" And we sort of had this thing, but they were so flipped out at that they gathered us into one room, but the one room was right in the front of the building, so the demonstration could just, in the media, could see us in there. And the best part of that was there's just they put the biggest cop guarding us, at the door, like we were going to do something like leave, and he's standing there, and he's this beautiful, large black man in his uniform, and very serious, standing there, He was going to protect the world from us, and all of a sudden his face changed, and he looks down at this woman who was the retired grammar school teacher, who was a spinster, and he looks down at her and he goes, "Mrs. Johnson?" And she goes, "Billy, is that you?" And the most beautiful thing that, the face that changed, and then they were all gathered around, and everybody's outside looking in, going, "What's going on? What's going on?" And there's this reunion of a student,
with a teacher, obviously,
of a former teacher, who was amazing. She was like a labor organizer. She came from organizing, union organizing, and actually retired from the schools early, so that she could, do her political activism full time, and ended up in the Spinsters with us.
Did you all, as a group, go down and do some things in Washington as well? Because I have the sense of having...
Well, with Phoenix.
Right, okay.
Right? That was a Phoenix trip that I remember really, really well. Because that was
I remember being underground with Teresa Carr and that.
Do you remember when we were in those damn buses?
Yes.
That was a little bit...
Being gassed?
Yes. Yeah, that was kind of, how do we protect ourselves and not panic and find a way to bring safety to ourselves and to change what's happening to us at this time. Because that was a lot of busloads of folks. And I think because of that situation, when we were brought in, it's interesting how I think I'm going to do something, and then I get to a point in the moment I say, no, I can't do it. Like that. So after all that experience of that whole wonderful demonstration, actually, you know, where I'll never forget the image of the gay boys all beautifully dressed up and, you know, in their outfits and doing the, you know, to the cops, who were a lot of queer cops, we find out, were asked if they wanted to work that day. This was the 93? 93.
I think.
Yeah.
It
was the...
I mean, those get mixed up for me because
Right.
we did a number of...
But they were doing the song about your gloves don't match your shoes, but because they all had to wear latex gloves, but they didn't get the colorful ones. And the beautiful, again, the connection and the smiling, because, you know, it's like, well, who are you, you know? But the testimony that came later, early hours of the morning after we went through all of that, and we were held and da-da-da, and they had all these courts sitting. Finally, we were brought into court. Courtrooms were full. My support was Jude Glaubman from Boston, so she was already out, and she could say like where the others were and all that stuff. And I get out there, and there was just like the lineup, you know, going before the judge and saying what you had to say. And there was a guy that was in front of me, and he was dying, and I was so moved by his ability to stand, really, even in the physical condition that he was in and what he just went through and what he spoke to the judge and how the judge treated him, that when I got in front of the judge, it was like I said my piece. And I just kept saying, he goes, well, you just have to agree to sign it. I said, I can't do that. And Jude was saying, no, we all agreed, we're going to sign. It's okay, we're going to sign. You know, she's trying to sign at me, and I'm looking at her and going, but I can't do it. And the judge, what are you doing? You know, I was like, get over there and just sign it. You know, I thought, you know, just go. I got to go to the next one. So I'm over there, and the court clerk is like going, no, really, ma'am, all you have to do is you just have to sign your name. And I was saying, like, but you don't understand. My name means something to me, and it, you know, I can't put it down there. I really think that it's not right to say that I'm guilty. It's not right to say that we should be honored for what we're doing. This guy should be honored for what he's doing. We should be, you know, whatever it was. And it was like all of a sudden the judge said, what? You? $10,000 on her head, or something like that. Be off with you. So it was like I felt like I was in like Alice in Wonderland. Off with her head. I was like, oh shit. Well. So off we go, and then I'm gathered around my women because they had gone through, and they didn't know that I did that. Only June knew I did that, and it was like, yeah. But why is she being separated? What's going on here? You know? Oh no, she's not. She didn't sign. She gets to put on the orange jumpsuit, and of course they were trying to make. I was like, what did I just do? You know, we were delirious. I mean, I knew in my heart what I did, but I didn't know I had what I was doing, and or where it would take me. And so it was like, okay, I'm getting the orange outfit. All my girlfriends here are saying I look really great in orange, so I'll have to remember that. And I also knew somewhere that I would not be lost there, because there's no way. We know that with each other, that you know, they would either pick through the brick to get at me, or there would be another way. So I knew that even in my tiredness, but it was really kind of hard. I was isolated, and as they all went off dancing back outside, I was like being processed in. There was maybe one other woman that was being processed in, I can't remember, or if I saw her then, or if I only saw her when we were being brought in to go through the process that you go through. Like I was put in my own like cell kind of thing, very tired, thinking, okay, now what do I do? And take a nap. And then it was, you know, you had to, you got to get up, you got to go through this, you know, you had to have the internal exam, you had to have your teeth examined. And I thought, okay, I know a little bit about this, and I know how I did it in England. There was a lot more of us, but I wonder if I could manage to do it on my own. And there, sitting in the room, were all these other women prisoners who had to go through this stupid, horrible, mean, nasty thing, being violated over and over and over again. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to do this. And they were like, oh, honey, you have to do this. I said, well, no, I don't have to do it. It's my body, and I can say no. Oh, no, honey, you can't say no. And there was another woman that I realized was part of the demonstration, and she was like, well, I wonder if, no, you can't not do it. I said, well, what if I don't do it? What's going to happen? You know, maybe I could go the next step. And before I found out, I think I had the teeth examined, and I let them do that because I never get a dental visit. I don't know. I'm poor and I never go to the dentist, so I got to ask them, so how are my teeth? Could you give me any information? And are you going to do any dental work? So I still had a little bit of my sense of humor. But then we got called, she and I think it was only the two of us, we got called into the doctor's office, and I thought, ooh, we're getting separated. And they heard you. This is now you're going to get it, because you're being separated out from us, and this is where it starts. And I was like, shit, so we can do this. And so I was with this other woman. We went in there. The guy closes the door behind. He said, just leave them with me. Kind of stern. He was a young guy, and shut the door behind him. And he said, all right. Do you know that you could be lost in this system? And I'm like, oh, here we go. I said, what's your point? He said, look, I'm gay. I couldn't be out there. Here I am, this is what I'm going to do. You really could be lost in the system. And I said, you don't know the women I know. He said, no, you don't know what they can do on the inside. I said, well, no, but here we are. And he said, so how do I contact who you need to be contacted? And he was like, he just took our contact information and he did the whole thing. And he said, this is what I can do today. And he was kind of happy that he had the opportunity, right? And we both said, you're welcome for having the opportunity. But I was grateful that I had the opportunity to meet somebody on the inside that said, we are, and then he said, I think they're looking for you. They do know that there's, we did get a call or somebody contacted me. There was like a network going on inside, as well as there was a network going on with the cops on the outside that was obvious too. I mean, when Teresa was going to get separated out because she's a bearded woman, and Phoenix was like, and they said, no, you're a man. And Phoenix was like, linked her arm with her, and actually, I think she actually had her cuffs, the two of them were cuffed together or something, I can't remember. Something really that was like, she was not letting this person go. And that was kind of amazing.
Oh. No, but I don't think the camera was on. I finished telling you about the Phoenix
Right.
stuff.
But you sounded like there was stuff we hadn't covered, right? There was something you wanted to speak.
Was it something at the camp?
There must have been. I mean, I talked about you and your group going to Washington.
Right.
And that there were actions that were done. Oh, one of the things I kind of wanted to ask you about was the kinds of, friendships and kinship and love triangles that get created. But, was there from Seneca an outgrowth and some things that are still in your life, relationship-wise and...
Yeah, it's interesting because they started at Seneca, like Margaret, a very significant person in my life, right? But I don't think about her that way anymore, And I think probably most of the women, unless I separate it out and say that period and who and what and where, I still come across women sometimes, oh, how do we know each other? And then it was maybe Seneca, but more often I think I can separate that out as a time, and it feels like a past, and it feels, I don't know about it. It's not like I'm in connection really directly anymore. Like I didn't know about the land getting taken away. I didn't know you weren't living there or something else, or maybe I thought, oh, maybe it went the way of the Onondaga Nation, that it got handed over. I didn't know, so I feel like, oh, I'm not really connected to Seneca Peace Camp, and yet, needless to say, it's everywhere, right? Because the women that I meet or connect, either they were also at Seneca or they know the women that I know, like even just anywhere in our lives. But I'm still connected to Teresa, other spinsters. Spinster doesn't exist anymore as spinsters. I guess I went through a lot of what I would call breakups with community. So Seneca would be one, meaning the ending of it in a, maybe not a final way like a relationship can say, okay, we're not doing this anymore, but in a way feels like it's more the past, but it's always, it has informed and is such a thread or fiber or a painting in my life. It's there. You know, it comes out. Like I know a piece of artwork I do is related to that. And I can't say I directly thought about it, but of all the time that I lived outdoors, you know, I lived outdoors there, right? These pieces come from that, you know. Maybe I didn't do it there, but it informed where later I started to do artwork that I left places also, and then it became part of my life. So even just I could almost say this piece here, which, you know, I don't know anything about Sundance, really. I know very little about Sundance, but this for me was, I call it spin her, because it's to touch her, you spin her, you know, and she spins. She's a spinning woman. And it's connected to weaving and spinning, and, you know, these are a way to take in what I recycle. You know, I take stuff off the street. I reuse what's there. And this is a poet. I need to find out who she is, because I took a quote from her.
Estelle, just a minute so I can get Estelle, so I can get a visual of that thing. Not too far.
She, you know, I use what I have to create what I need. We use what we have to create what we need. I don't know what poet said that, a woman, but it's somewhere in her lines, and it has become sort of it's what I do in life. And now I do that so much in my life that others now use that as a phrase to say, oh, you know, when they do workshops, they say, now, just like Alessandra, we use what we have to create what we need. You know, what do we? So, and that's in many, many senses, right? It's whether it's a piece of theater, piece of artwork, whether it's building a cabin, whether it's like putting together, you know, understanding our psychology or our socio whatever. It's like, what do we use, you know, to just move into the next, what do I want to create? And so that was like when I was building the cabin, that was actually what I did. Jennifer was part of that. She was sort of my connection to Vermont. Her friend Kathy Weiss had a piece of land, was going up there, and Jennifer wasn't doing the circus that year or something, and so she was going to just go up to shore. She lost a job she was going to have, and she was going to live up there on this land. And then we were just sort of, our bond was sort of building, and I said, oh, I'd love to do that. I'll come visit you. And, you know, and I went up there, and of course the affair, that's so blew. But then I ended up staying up there a lot of that time, and I, you know, built a cabin out of found stuff. Either it was given to me by Vietnam vets that like have their camps out there and they can't believe this woman is doing this, you know, and all of a sudden there's like buckets of bent nails and, you know, old telephone pole butt ends that some other guy was holding on to and saving because they're a treasure, right? You could put them in the ground and they can hold up a building, you know. And so I started receiving gifts, you know, and then I started like taking stuff off the streets in New York, and because I was coming here more, it took a long time. But this is stuff, the black tarp comes from Jennifer having been up there, had to go and do some photo thing of a circus thing in Georgia, and she said, oh, they were just like covering it for one day, you know, so the lighting was right to do the filling. So she said, oh, I should wrap that up and take that back to Alessandra. We could use that up in Vermont. You know, so people started like even transporting things instead of throwing it away. They participated in taking it. So it's very like ritual and just, I don't know what you would call it. It's everything. So that I didn't use every bit of that black plastic, but it was my commitment to keep transforming it, because eventually over the years it couldn't cover the pile of wood anymore that I was slowly building this thing or my materials. So because it does decay. Plastic does decay. It doesn't do what we want it to do. But then I had these, so I said, just symbolically, I had to use it in a piece. So it got in there. And that's the old wiring that I took out from the building that was coming down. My friend was taking down, and I scavenged lumber from it. It was this great old, like when they used to wrap the old wiring for a house, they wrapped it in fabric. It's fabric, and it's, you know, it's all natural stuff. It's really wild, and I love it. And it's, to me, it's color and it's shape and it's form and it's everything. Anyway, she grew out of it, and it's, to me, it's a very joyful, spiritual sort of movement. I'm just spinning into the next, you know, transformation, and we are spinning into the next transformation. And the blessing that I got was a little like when I finally did, because I started taking these things instead of just making them and leaving them where they were. My sister in Norway was like, you can't do that, you know. She goes, you can't do that. She yelled at me. I was in Norway, and I was like, had 2 days on this little island by myself, and she came back. She goes, what are you doing? I said, no, I'll put them all back. She goes, put them back? You know, I just made all these sculptures all along the coast of this section of this thing because the stones were so cool, and I was all into balancing, and life is all balance, right? And she was saying, no, the tide's coming in, you're going to lose, you have to. So my older sister, she like shamed me into like carrying these up and making drawings, and she made me take them back to the United States. I was like, I'm not carrying this stuff. No, but this one actually came to Vermont, but it was from her, because that normally would have stayed in the brook, and instead it became this figure that I would get to see in the brook, and then couldn't really do anything with it because I couldn't balance the head where I wanted it. And she said, well, make a sculpture. You can actually just drill something and do this and do that. And this woman here saw it and said, I want you to show that in a group show. And then she wanted me to have a solo show, so I had to make stuff. But they came indoor, what I call it's how can they bring them indoors? And she said, and I realized how I could bring them indoors. They're okay indoors. They hold their own, and they actually could be, and actually that's a brake pad from I knew that piece wasn't finished. It still needed something, and I found in Santa Fe, so it was years later, I found this brake pad. I think it's from a motorcycle. And I said, that's what she's holding, you know, and I call it the reader. She's like telling the stories. She's reading the written word. And this one's a spinner, and there's a kid, 2 kids when I had this show in Brooklyn. One came in, little 2-year-old, and was just like, I hung it free, hanging in the room, and I wanted people to touch it. And it's so interesting how people think they can't touch art. It's like, no, spin her. And so this little kid came up and looking at her and just trying to reach and speak, just goes, oh, and so I spun it for him, and he just goes, oh, wow. And there's all these women just like standing around this little kid going, oh, wow. You know, it's like, wow, I guess that worked. And then this one was a kid who was walking by with a kid a little older than him. They had their McDonald's bag. They just went and got their food, and they were bringing it, I guess, back home or whatever. And they're looking in the window, and it had all these figures of these women that balanced with each other. And they're all kind of hidden right now, but they were, you don't know if the ball, if she's pregnant, if she's growing a tumor, if she's balancing the earth. And that comes from this image of, who was also my inspiration, Audre Lorde. I'm sure you've seen that thing where she has her beautiful garb on, her hands are up in the air, and she's just like, you know, I forget the quote that was on that card, but it's her image of this, like, wow. And so this figure that I did came out of her, and that photograph, whoever took that of her, and just loving her so much. And I just felt like, oh, and then these guys, they were magic, totally magic. I made one, and I didn't know how to do it, and the clay was falling off the thing, because I'm not a trained artist, just do it. And although I've learned from a lot of teachers, and it was falling apart, and I went, oh, what do I do? And paper mache, I'll just wrap it in paper mache, and that'll hold it. And then I was like, oh, wrap it in paper mache. Well, we do this all the time. Then you cut it off, you put it together, and you make another one. So I ended up making 13 of them. And the magic is they balanced on top of each other. And I made this thing in the window with all these women figures with these balls, whatever they were, tumor, earth, balancing, life, and they're like all balancing on top of each other. So these kids walk by and they're like, what's this? So I see them, I go, you gotta come in, you know. So they came in, they goes, what's this? You know, I said, oh, this is like an art show, and it's a gallery now, and it's like whatever. And they're like oohing and on. This one kid, first of all, he was like very seriously looking at all these pieces of artwork, and I was like, that's great. And then he went over and he just stood in front of this one, and it was about I think it was on that, and so it was that high, and his head came up to maybe, you know, a little more than that, and he was looking up at it, and I said, so what do you think? And he said, I like this one's my favorite. I said, oh really, what do you like about it? He said, well, she has hands even though I can't see them. I was like, oh, thank you. It's like, you know, it's like he understood what this was and what it was holding and what he loved about it. I thought, that is too cool. That's what you love about it. You know, you see something that's not there, that you know is not there, but you know is there. And that's what you like about it. And he wrote in my thing, I hope you win the prize. He said, you got to sign my book. This is what we do. You know, you have a show, you got to sign the book. So I signed his name, and he said, I hope you win the prize. And I said, I did. I did. I just won.
Yeah.
I just did. Why did we get onto that?
Well, I think we must be into some of what came from the peace camp in some ways, or started there maybe, or
Supported me in that, yeah.
Supported and
Well, the politics always did. I mean, that you could say that's me using that tool, my art or my skill or my part of my essence, being that creative, working with, like the tools, working with my hands, building things. But it also got appreciated, supported. It had a niche. It's like it found its niche. It's bringing together the artwork with the politics. You know, being able to make beautiful things, sing, making costumes. I mean, before I ever did costumes for theater, I mean, I did political work. All our costumes were, you know, well, how are we going to make it look like blood pouring off of your body and making it a shroud like the skin? You know, we had to, like, how do we visualize these things that are so, we don't want to visualize, but we have to, because we're saying we want to bring this to the open. This is what happens. So how do we make that visual? You know, and that's why when I started working with Jennifer, it was like, I was at home with her, you know. Will you know, she would give me a book and she said, oh, that was probably the biggest project I did when I was still living in New Haven. It's like, I want these horses. Can you make me these horses? And she showed me a figure of these horses. And she said, this is totally what we do. We steal things, right? But, so she showed me this and she said, I want 2 of these, because I want them to be in the show and I want them to dance and together. In the middle, there's actually the dance of these 2 figures in South India doing that. And, you know, it's my love for her, hers for me, whatever. It's like, yeah, I want to do that for you. My love for making art and for doing it for this circus that is too cool. And they're beautiful, you know, and they've revived and been revived again. And then they were in my niece's wedding, her Indian part of her wedding, because she's part Indian, Asian Indian, and it was just so cool. Like, who knew that? Like, she said, I would love to have, like, you know, the groom usually comes on a white horse, and they're white horses, and, you know, they come stolen from India, you know, Indian theater performance in South India, and, you know, the elephant was, because Jennifer wanted some elephant puppets, and I made these 2 baby elephants, and, you know, she told me, my niece told me, well, one reason why I would like to get married in India is because the bride gets to ride on an elephant, and I want to ride on a beautifully painted, decorated elephant. So I said, okay, I'm going to bring a horse and an elephant to your ceremony, and we'll, like, deck it out. So it was pretty cool the way things sort of go around and around and around. But that's what, you know, and I never could do, that was the other thing, I thought it was a privilege to, in a way, to do your artwork, to have the leisure time to do your artwork. So I always did it in the political work. I never actually did these kinds of things, separated out of. Like, no, I have to do other stuff. You know, I can do it for the theater that's political. I could do it, you know, because that's what gave me, coming to New York, and Jennifer gave me that connection with, oh, I don't have to just do it for a demonstration. I actually make these pieces of work, sculpt them, sculpting the costumes, designing the sets, working with these other artists, sort of just making this stuff for this political theater, you know, and wow, that's pretty cool. So it gave me more of what I wanted to do, but I never thought I could just do that only. And then my sister and this stuff started to say, yeah, you can do it, just for the fact you have to. That's what it was. It was like, oh, I have to do that. So that was when I turned 50. I said, okay, I'm doing that. And I had that show. I haven't since, but it put me in another place, right? And it's, you know, visions of art is integral to our work. And then also the political artists, then, of course, that I get introduced to in the world, you know, that's how you do it. That's what we need, you know. We need the artists, whatever, whether it's music or paintings or, you know, installations. We need those voices in understanding what we're doing and where we're going.
Why?
Well, I feel like that we are translators also. We are communicators of sort of the world that we live in, our communities. So, you know, Jenny Romaine, for example, you know, here she is, a theater artist, she's a director, she's a creator, she works with a collective called Great Small Works, and all her work is, you know, it look what she did last night. It was all about all these different, she's asked to do this, but she's asked to do it because of all these organizations like Jews for Racial and Economic Justice that she works with, or, the Workman's Circle, or, Circus of Muck, or wherever she worked. She always is working within this community of, we need to speak about the issues that are affecting our lives, like Jennifer. And for me, that's like, what a gift to be able to bring together, to find that there are these artists that live that way. I have a series I want to do that's all in my head. I haven't done it yet, but it's going to be women artists who are artists as activists. And I just want, it's like what you're doing, documenting us by doing this film. I want to do it with paint on it. Just a very traditional form, which is paint, like yours is a traditional form of film. We can use those forms, right, to, here we go, create what we need, to give voice to, or to give, something, because somebody sees this, they're going to do what they want with. Somebody sees a painting of either Miller or, Jenny Romaine or Padma, like the painting of this woman that's in my kitchen is, this, I call it a sketch. It's with paint, but it's this woman who in South India, and Padma, and she's a theater director, and she does outrageous work, She does street theater work like that. It goes beyond it. She does this performance with people who it's collectively brought together, although she directs it. And then they brought the issue out in the public forum of female infanticide. You don't talk about it, but we all know it exists. And you're talking about issues of poverty. You're talking about women's issues. You're talking about, and she created this piece that was in the inception to bring it to a local place, which is, you're talking about the marketplace, where people gather, people talk, and then you do this theater, which I think is probably not unusual, although I don't know that much about Indian street theater. And then from that, the way they do it, that the discussion starts to happen right there. In other words, who's the actor and who's the actor in the piece and who's the person now, at the marketplace, and has started, because it's like, well, they're talking about it, and who is it? And the discussion starts. It starts to have an open forum, and I think she's so incredibly radical in that, that alone. And she came here with her kids. They joined her later. She was on some Fulbright thing and ended up working with Circus and Muck. Wouldn't you know? And of course, she was right at home with us, and then her kids were right at home with us, And then Pony was she was maybe 14 at the time, and we did something. It was one of the few times Circus went outside of New York. There was somebody that brought us up to Amherst somewhere to do it indoor for some festival. Maybe even it was Felice Pascal, but somebody like that, right? All these connections we have. And so she came up there, and there we are camping out in some women's center or some center, and there's we're all falling asleep at night, and there's Pony, and she goes, "But Ma, why didn't you tell me that you knew, what gay was?" And because her mother's like, "Well, yes, honey, I did know that gay existed." And she's like, "But Ma, why didn't you ever tell me?" She says, "Well, I didn't know that it wasn't really in our lives," or whatever, right there and then. Something, I forget what she said. She was trying to say, "Well, I didn't mean to hide it from you." And she said, "But look at me." She goes, "My whole perspective of the United States is from a lesbian perspective." It's like she was, when she came here and her mother was in theater, and where her mother went and who the women were doing this, the theater was just and this daughter was this is her whole view of USA, lesbian identified, queer, theater, art, and so at home, and then she went back and she started doing it. Lo and behold, and if she's not herself, queer, doing some pretty amazing things. But anyway, that's why my, wanting to do the paintings, I have to honor that, because...
And so that's the vision to...
That's one of them, is to just travel and do those paintings of those women.
Artists.
Yeah, especially also before they go, like Inky already. I mean, all of her drawings are in my head. And I sat with her and interviewed her, didn't really do even sketches of her. And now she's had a stroke, I think, a few times. Inky is Ingrid Rava, who is one of the women. Her mother was a survivor of the concentration camp, Ravensbrück, the women and children. It was the only women and children concentration camp. And it was in the East, and we went and we had a tour, and we actually went there. And these next generation, Margaret and all them, then found them and hooked up. There was all this survivors group. Well, Inky is the daughter of one of those survivors, and she's in her 90s now, and she was a dancer. She danced through the whole war. Her mother said she'd just keep dancing, and when she couldn't dance and perform anymore in places she could choose, then she had to dance for the soldiers. And her stories are unfucking believable. And now she can't, but all the way up into her late 80s, she was still doing, in early 90s, she couldn't stop doing the political work because they were changing. I said to her, Inky, what, can't you take a break? And she said, well, they're trying to write history, and I was there, so I can't let them. So she kept doing it. And so it's, you know what I mean? So you don't want to lose them before you do it, in a way. And I haven't. I mean, other people have works of her and interviewed her, and hopefully are going to keep that. They will. But I want to do the painting. I'm not there yet. That's the other reason why making money to do the clay wall is so I can really just do some of this stuff, because it means traveling. I want to go to those places. I want to go to Padma in South India. I want to go back to Berlin. And I don't want others to always have to pay for it for me. I mean, it's okay. My collective in Germany still maintains that connection with me, which is really great. Yeah. Art.
One thing you haven't talked very much about is spirituality.
Mm.
And did you
Really?
No, totally.
You didn't hear it?
No.
I'm just
No, but
kidding.
specific. Did you see and experience spirituality at Seneca?
Come on. Yes. Big time. Big time. And in all those places. And really with all the women. There's no question. I mean, it's every day in my life. It transforms the world. And it's my, I don't go to church. I don't do that kind of stuff. Although I do go to churches sometime or different places just to sort of see what it feels like. But yeah, I think mine, and that's maybe why for me the spirituality stuff is so great about living outdoors, like at Seneca and Greenham, why I could do it, and why I did Vermont, is because that's the home of my spirituality. And it's here because it's the earth, so it's everywhere, clearly. So I feel like I'm gifted because I'm like 2 blocks away from one of the most beautiful parks in the city. And sometimes I wonder, why am I in the city? What am I doing here? But hey, I get to compost. I know a lot of community gardens. I get to go in and out of them. People for some reason I'm a member, but not. I'm a kind of peace camp member. And somehow people understand that. I don't have to even say I'm that way. People are that way too. So I met a woman the other day. She goes, oh yeah, my house happens to be next to this community garden and nothing's happening to it. Will you just come by and get a key, and maybe you could just because I'm so at home with it, I think. That I think people feel that, and just, like the woman that worked on my body, she only knows me from meeting her in her studio, and she did one-on-one sort of, she's a Pilates teacher, but she did other stuff with me, just getting me to understand what my skeletal and muscle structure is doing and why I have the pain that I have, and helping me negotiate that myself, teaching me how to know those parts of my body and maybe what's going on. And second time I went to see her, she said, there's something interesting about you. I have this image of you. I get this visual image of you, and you're not in the city. Like, where did you say you lived? I said Brooklyn. She goes, no, you're in a country home. You're in a country home. I said, does it have clay on the walls? She said, do you have clay on your walls? I said, yes. So then she was like, oh, that might be what I'm seeing. Yeah. But it is, so I think I found a way to sort of make it. And I think of myself living in a village. That's how I've survived too. I've finally put those words to it. I live in a village called Park Slope, and Manhattan is really another world, you know. It's not even another village, maybe it's another state or another something. It's that different, so that I can feel, because I need to live more close to home, like as if I lived in the woods, you know, like if I lived at Seneca. We didn't go out. We did a lot of life and living and work, and whether it was, you know, cooking food, painting the house, or, you know, getting ready to do an action. It was all sort of home, nearer to home base. And that's what I liked about Germany, you know, and I loved that experience of our collective was 3 different houses in 3 different villages, you know. And there was community gardens, some were at certain places, some were in the middle, some were shared with other farmers. There was this other farmer and that we did the potato field with, or whatever, you know, so there was stuff like that. And that kind of sense of, you know, there's a lot you could share when you think in terms of village life. It makes it more manageable. I think it was after 2001 I said, if I stay here, I need to think about living here differently. Like, how can I live here? Because the energy, that was intense with, like, just the, you know, the that everybody got around that. And people were really, like, talking to it. Beautiful, beautiful conversations, really trying to understand. A lot of my artist friends were trying to do that in their work, like really use their theater to, like, have a conversation. You know, that's the other use of art, is to allow that conversation to happen. And I don't know. And I thought, if I do this, if I stay here, because it's pretty intense to be living in a place. I wasn't here when it happened. And I was actually in my old home in Connecticut, Chaplin, and I was getting gifted a new car. We had just done a theater thing in Maine, and I was getting my car, and I was going to go register it in Vermont. And that's when I saw it, you know, happening. It was on every TV, and it was being played over and over and over again. And the first thing was, I want to go home. Which was, I wanted to come back here. I needed to be, you know, and in a way that's crazy. Why would you go to a place that's so toxed out right now and so fucked up? And then the reality of was, I can't go home. They've shut down all the bridges. There's no transportation going in and out. I won't be able to go back in. So that was also, you know, like, we've had these discussions with each other about that, like how to prepare for what happens, you know. And a lot of our, maybe sometimes it was fear, too much fear-based than I would have liked it to be. But that, you know, that there's a reality. The shutdown can happen. When they want to do it, they can do it. We know that from other time periods. We know it from what's happening in other countries. And that was a little taste for me of, oh, so do you really want to be there? You know, because you know it's not going to be easy to get out. You don't have a boat, you know. If they could shut down the bridges, you know, how do you do that then, connecting thing happening? So it just made me think a lot. Then I thought, okay, as I stay here longer, because I don't get the idea that I'm going to leave yet, how do I do it? Then this whole, like, village thing again. But that's how we live in encampments. That's how we live on women's land. That's how we think about ourselves. And, you know, it's like a lifestyle. And there's a lot in that. And I was having this conversation with, actually with Rachel, who's studying urban planning. And she's saying, you know, yeah, but village is always out. There's always, like, the outsider or the ones that don't belong. You can only have community. You know, you can only have community if you identify as separate from other, and they're out there. And I was saying, well, actually, that was never my sense of community. My sense of community was always a place where you learned what that was, and then how that connects with, not excludes others. And I know that in our time of doing all this living as women or as lesbians in our own separatist kind of places, and all those discussions and ways of doing it and managing it and understanding it, you know, okay, we did isolate ourselves, or we did choose to organize or live or be and do work together separately from other, but it wasn't like, for me it was never, it was a celebration of having that space. And yes, it was, you are not welcome here in this space because this is what we need to do here, but it doesn't mean that, you know, you're my enemy or I don't want to have discourse. That's why the Green Gate was great for me, because there was women there who had male partners, family, whatever, children, husbands, whatever, brothers, and they were welcome. We just had a place where we could welcome them, and we did some amazing like drumming circles and did beautiful things that interface. So it wasn't the sense of exclusionary. And that's what I wanted to really sort of share with Rachel, but she's coming from an academic place of, and really sort of structure and planning, the actual urban planning, and I see it more as experience and my lifestyle. So it's fun to sort of talk to her to see like how our worlds are, and how we look at things. But spirituality, so it's there in all of it for me. It's why it's very special to me to like go to where I was in That's part of my, I don't call it that, but I know that's what it is to go to the land that I used to live on, where, right, that's where I told you the story where it first started for me about Seneca and Greenham, and everything was there. And these are the forsythia plants that, have grown, and I know when they're blooming, and I happen to be there, and I know that if I remember, I can bring some back and have them in my home. And so stuff is like that a lot for me, And even what I pick up off the street here becomes either a ritual or who I pass it on to, or how long it stays with me until it goes somewhere else. It's like it's, you didn't have to go to the dump site, which there's no room anymore for, and you don't have to go to the incinerator, which we can't really afford to have those incinerators, and stop them. Spinsters were part of stopping the incinerator of coming into New Haven. That was all like whoever in the neighborhood started doing that. It's all, it feels very, I guess we don't always call it spiritual, but it feels like it's very deeply part of my action but I don't do that anymore. I don't do civil disobedience. I don't do that right now in my life, which is interesting. For a while I lamented it. I was longing and missing it, and I don't have my group. I don't have my affinity group. When that whole thing in 2001 happened, it was like, where do I go for this? Where's my, and it was really like, do I change my life now? Is this a shift I take? What do I do? And I did this thing where I spent time in Germany and sort of gave myself some time to it was a little bit of a, what do you call it? Like a pilgrimage, or a time to think about or be, and what do I do now? Do I stop what I'm doing now, and do I just go back full time, doing civil disobedience and organizing with a group, and where does that take us, And it was very interesting because I went to the collective and with my friends there, and I went to my sisters, and I went to Berlin, and I saw Inky because I really wanted to talk to her about like how did she choose to do what she did in her life, and got a lot more of her stories. And I went to where my aunt and uncle were both part of the resistance movement in France, in a little village up in the mountains, and the whole village and the whole area started to just like participate in this nonviolent way of just saving people's lives. They just took in kids as if they were their own family. They changed identity. My aunt and this woman who came to live with them, who ended up being a family member, they had beautiful penmanship, and so they were rewriting. They were forging all these documents. They were making documents. And the value of that. They just did it. And then when I learned about them, I thought, you're so straight, I never thought you would do something like that, because you're so religious, number one, can you do, you like forge papers? And they were like, yeah, that's what we had to do, and we did it, and hearing their story. So I went to their grave, which was up in that village, and I wanted to go back to the village. And it was actually her granddaughter, which is my cousin, came. We went there together. And yeah, and what came out of it is to just do your artwork, do your artwork, do your artwork, do your artwork. So that's when more of this stuff came out.
Back in the day, the Seneca thing, the idea of nuclear war, sort of that in the consciousness of people, how much, if at all, does war or nuclear war inform your daily?
I I think I don't spend a moment. I mean, that might be extreme, but I feel like somewhere in me, I don't spend a moment without knowing that's very real. Extremely real. I mean, it's the warfare that's going on the planet. I saw it, in New York with Giuliani. I was just like, he was an example of what was to come. And he, in other words, what they tried out in this city, I felt like with making, first it was the guys who were washing the windows. They became illegal. It just sort of felt like what happened in Germany, who became illegal. You could just make them, the people who were ill and didn't have homes, they became, whatever. They couldn't say that we who gave money to people on the street, they couldn't arrest us, but they certainly tried to convince us not to, and that they were illegal. They couldn't be asking you for money, Then it was the artists on the street, the vendors, the food vendors, so many people started to they started getting fines and being arrested, and people that were homeless, that needed help or needed, they were locked up in institutions, but then they were let out of institutions, and then they were arrested on the street because they were loitering or they were sleeping on the subway. So I would purposely get on the subway and I'd put my feet up, and if I was dozing, I'd put my head down, and and if there was some guy, this older gentleman who happened to be black and I happened to be white and younger, and we're getting off I'm getting off at my stop, and I see this cop and he tells the guy to get off, and he starts writing him a ticket, and I'm like, well, why are you not writing me a ticket? And the old guy just goes and sits down because he was tired, man. He was tired. This was his place to sleep, and I ended up having a discussion with this cop and really having a dialogue about what their job is now in this city and why they are doing what they do. And he was very open and honest with me about why he was doing what he was doing. Yeah, I have to fill a quota. He totally understood when I asked him, what are you doing? Why aren't you giving me this? He admitted it, he admitted it, and he said, you know what? I have to do certain things, or I'm going to be put in a place to do work that I don't want to do. And I'm almost out of here. If they don't like me, they want me to retire early so they don't give, so then you see the connection you have with everybody. But we knew that at the camps. I learned that at the camps, when we were talking with the police or we were talking with the soldiers. I learned that at Seneca. They kept having to take the soldiers and bring in the next round some other, regiment from somewhere else because they got to know us, and finally the dogs got to know us, so they had to get the geese because, they tried everything. Because, you can only live alongside somebody for so long before, of course you're going to talk to each other. This is a joke that, this is this real but unreal dividing thing, right? It's real. Racism is real, and it divides us. But it's unreal. That's a fabrication. What is race, right? And who decided that? And why do we get divided? It's like religious wars. Is it really religious wars? I hate that. Yes, I don't want to deny that there is religion that plays into it, but isn't it about power? Isn't it about ownership of land? Isn't it about who controls what? So I guess it is informing sort of daily. But now it's more about saying not to get lost in it, not to feel weakened by it. And that was the thing with Giuliani, not to feel, or with Bush, the whole Bush time is man, how much worse can it get? The destruction that we are, and the power, look at, it's our money that's doing this, right? It's all of our hard-earned money. Never mind these kids that are going there. I see the kids in this city that are gone, I talk to them, I see the kids. I workshop with Jenny in some schools. I'm not doing it now, but did, and the prisons, doing theater, doing toy theater because it's smaller, because it's paper, because anybody has access to it, How the artists have, found the forms, they're sort of using the forms that they can because that's what they have to do what they need to do and still make art, I mean, it's kind of a ritual, but it is what I do. It's what I love to do. I see it, but I feel fortunate. I'm not forced to pick up that stuff. Just, I like to. I see the beauty in it. So, okay, the war is going on. The wars go on. We know that our military is everywhere. We know that we're spending all this money. It has increased to a capacity that I can't even get my head around. I just say, $11 billion a month? I don't even understand that, you know. Somebody will say, yeah, but these, you know, they have welfare. They shouldn't be on welfare. And I just go, $11 billion a month? Who, you know, of course, you know, that's not my enemy. That's not your enemy. You know, think about where that money's going and why we don't have it. And these are the things I learned, and these are the things then I talk about daily. Really, it's daily, just in a conversation. And also, Espy helps me a lot with this. She's very spiritual. She's an incredible political activist. And I got to meet her through the whole Puerto Rican Hartford sham, and horrible thing that happened during that whole time. But really powerful work happens, you know, and changes the world. And it's to celebrate that. That's what it is, celebrating the things that we do. And Jenny's great at that. And that's why last night was really a celebration. I mean, you're talking about housing, losing housing in this city to an incredible degree, you know, to the point where really, come on, where are we going to go? And where are people going to go? And sure, times were bad before and times are bad now. And how do we, like, be creative and celebratory in our, you know, and it's gathering people across really quite big differences, the so-called big differences that you realize are really don't exist. But it's only because you can open the dialogue and you can join the, you know, the kind of music, you know, with the next country's music, the next culture's music, the next language, you know. And Jenny's she knows how to pull people from so many different places and then create a piece that's, you know, next to people, you know. It's like Jennifer. Jennifer does it in another way. We go and do the circus and, you know, the different boroughs. We go there and we bring this queer circus, and it's just like, was it last year or the year before? There was this kid who was like 16. He had watched every circus, and he said he got it for the first time that, are you gay? Is this a queer circus? And he's gay. So it's like the whole time he loved and celebrated the circus coming to his, you know, neighborhood, to his, like, and growing up with it and being celebratory with it and not even knowing that this was really why it was speaking to him on some level too. It was about his life, but there was another level. It was about his life he didn't know about. And now, wow, and I'm ready to say wow, and he started traveling with the circus to other boroughs. You know, it's like, yeah, that's the work she does. That's the work that we do, right? Isn't that?
Uh-huh.
And sometimes you don't even know. And I think everybody's like that, not just us. I mean, a lot of people do that kind of life, you know.
You don't know how somebody else is being affected by what you do.
Yeah. And celebrating that so that you don't lose, so we don't lose, I don't lose my faith or my belief that we can do it, you know. It's not my lifetime, which is going to be probably a long life, something.